So it's right at 10:30. We got some people still filing in, but we're going to get through the first couple slides that are not what anybody ever wants to see, but are kind of up there. So this is like the best time of morning to have your session, right? Because it's late enough, you've had breakfast, and you're not quite fully asleep, and yet it's not into the afternoon, I'm in a snooze type frame. So this is the power of bidirectional relationships. My name is Chad Adams, and hopefully we're going to have some fun this morning. So I work for Skeleton Key. We're based in St. Louis. We're a platinum level member of the FBA. I've been there for about 8 years, last March, and I do a lot of things for them. I'm a developer, I'm a trainer, I do some sales engineering type stuff, some tech lead type things. And I am certified in several versions of FileMaker, although you'll see that I'm missing something. And so this is my little ploy for all of you in-house developers. I was in-house whenever the FileMaker 9 certification was out, and it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal, and so I didn't go and do it. It'd be so nice if I could just put FileMaker 7 through 16 certified, but I'm missing one there, so I kind of have to list them out instead. So that's my encouragement to you to get certified. You don't know where your career is going to take you, and it's beneficial for down the road. It's beneficial for now to your current employer, so being certified is worth it. How many of you attended my session last year on the graphic model? Anybody? Okay. So this session is kind of a sequel to that. It's like a part 2, if you will. It's a deeper dive into the same concept. And so the first half-ish of this session is going to be a quick review of last year's sessions, in case you weren't there. So if you were there, please hang on for a little bit, and we're going to recap. We'll go kind of quick through some of that. It's not a full recap, but we're going to try to touch on some things to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. Alrighty? And our plan for the next little bit is basically to explain what a bidirectional relationship is, do a quick recap of last year's session, talk about why context is king, as we're going to cover that a little bit. We're going to talk about why bidirectional relationships and the unified graph in particular is more dry, and we'll explain what dry is a little bit. And then, I'm afraid I'm going to go too far because I'm not used to using this. We're going to talk about if it's even possible and how to convert a different style of graph into a unified graph if you chose to do so. And so you'll find that sometimes throughout the session, I'm going to refer to what I'm calling the unified graph. And that's because in a unified graph, the relationships are bidirectional by nature. And so really the session is about bidirectionality of the graph. But I'm referring to the unified graph in a lot of times because of how it's automatically bidirectional. And so forgive me if I'm getting the terminology a little backwards there. If that's confusing, feel free just to call me on that, and I'll try my best to say that differently. Okay? And then at the end, we're going to have a little Q&A and go from there. So first, a quick review. This is the review of last year's session time frame. So how did we get here? So this is how the relationships of the past, what they used to be like, right? And how they came about. So used to, relationships were very list-like, and we'll look at some of that stuff. But Anchor Buoy helped us get over that hump and helped us learn how to use the new graph. And so we're gonna explore that a little bit. Some questions that I asked you to think about last year were, why are you using the graphing technique that you're using? And so the idea here is, I do this with my customers all the time, is that we'll ask them, well, why do you do invoicing the way you're doing it? Well, their answer is like, we've always done it that way. And so I'm always telling my customers that I want you to not just do it because you've always done it that way. I want you to do it the best way, right? And as a developer, I find that I do the same thing. And as I look at other developers' code, they do the same thing too. And what I've found is that I use the same technique I've always used because it works and I'm used to it and it's familiar. And what I'm encouraging you to do is to be that artist and be that craftsman that you are actually thinking about how to use the graph and not just doing it the way you've always done it. So, and we'll get more into that as well. And then if time allows, this is like after how everybody has the end slide, like felt the evaluation stuff. After that slide, if time allows, and you ask about it, I'll show you the testing results from the session I did last year. Because what last year's session was I built the same solution 3 times, 3 different ways, using 3 different graphing techniques, and then compared like what I found as far as development time and speed on the server and all kinds of different things like that. So I've got some of that stuff with me, and we can look at that if time allows, or catch me in the hall, and I'm happy to sit down and talk about it with whomever. So. All right, so quick review. This is how relationships used to look in FileMaker 6. We didn't have a graph at all, we had a list of relationships. And we had the file name up at the top there, which is our table name now. And we would relate that to a different table here. So remember, this is the point where before we actually had multi-table files. So this is a separate file altogether, right? And then, sorry, my thing says it went. All right, go again. There we go. So we had the relationship in the middle there. We only had equals relationships. We didn't have greater than, less than, or not equal to, or X joins, or anything of that nature. It was only equals. And then we would name the relationship. We would give us a description so we could know, what the relationship was called. And so everything was outward looking, right? We would start in one file and look out to the other files. We had multi-files again, not multi-tables in one file. This is what the edit relationship window looked like. It's not surprisingly that much different than what we have now, although we do things vastly differently. This screen itself is not a lot different. And in FileMaker 6, went too far. We named the relationships, and today, since FileMaker 6, we named the table occurrences. Okay? So this is an example of a relationship list from FileMaker 6. And this is a fairly complex system. Remember, this is one file looking out to other files. There's probably a 40-file solution, give or take. There's 109 relationships in this file. So think about that in like an anchor buoy system. This would be one table occurrence group with 109, buoys off of it, right? And whenever you converted this into FileMaker 7, it looked like that, which is hard to see because it's really long and stuff. And so if you zoom that in a little bit, that gives you a better picture of what that looked like. And as FileMaker developers, we could now put multi-tables into the same file, which was hugely powerful, and it was a great temptation, for lack of a better word, right? And so what would happen is that pretty soon all of our solutions look like this. And Anchor Buoy helped us get past this, right? Anchor Buoy, it really saved the day and helped us make sense of this, because this doesn't make any sense. So if you're in any sort of a situation where you're dealing with an IT department, right, and you're already having trouble selling that FileMaker is a real solution, and FileMaker is a real platform, and FileMaker is a real thing, and you've got a perfect graph and everything's organized and documented and it looks well, that's still a hard sell sometimes. If they see this, it's a really hard sell, right? Because this doesn't look professional at all. And so moving from 6 to 7 was really important, that we had some way to manage the graph, and Anchor Buoy saved our bacon, really. So my contention, part of my soapbox, for lack of a better term, is that I think we've stagnated a little bit. We've settled on that technique, and we've not been creative in our methods for solving problems. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Anchor Buoy. In fact, I use Anchor Buoy all the time. It's still a good technique. It's still a good solution. My argument or my contention is that I want us to be creative in how we go about solving our clients' problems. And when we look at the graph and we're thinking about the solution that we're trying to build, I think we should sit there and look at that and think, is this the best way to solve the problems I need to solve for my client? Or is it just what I'm used to and what I'm most familiar with and what I'm, is easiest for me? Whenever Anchor Buoy is the only tool in your toolbox, everything looks like a nail. I think that sometimes we don't realize that that's happening. We don't realize that the only tool in our toolbox is Anchor Buoy. So that's my encouragement to you. Be a craftsman, be an artist, be someone who's evaluating whether the tool they need is the right one. Have lots of tools in your toolbox. And so today we're going to talk about unified graph and bidirectionality and try to add another tool if we can. So, quick show of hands. I've been talking about FileMaker 6, and some of you are like, what's that? How many people here have never used FileMaker 6? All right, so that's a lot of you, right? And so that means that you've only ever known the graph, okay? So here is a quick timeline. I didn't update this. This is from last year's slides, and that's getting cut off a little bit. But anyway, you can still kind of see. It's getting cut off down here. It's okay up there. So I didn't update it for FileMaker 16, so this is a year old. And even at that, the amount of time we've had the graph is longer than the amount of time we've had the relationship list view, right? And so, back before FileMaker 3, we didn't have relationships. And then all the way through FileMaker 6, we had the relationship list. And so my argument, again, is that FileMaker, or the anchor buoy method, is really about helping us get over that hurdle. And it did a really great job of that. But maybe now it's time that we don't just default to that as our go-to method. Maybe we should think about other methods and explore what's available there. Okay? So in anchor buoy, we do togs. This is a simplified version of an anchor buoy graph. These are table occurrence groups, or togs. We'll be talking about that just a little bit. And typically, the graph is set up in this way in a left to right thinking, right? So I've got my table occurrences over here, my kind of head of my anchors, if you will, and I'm looking to the right at the other data. And that's very much like it was in FileMaker 6. That's very much the same thinking that we had when we had the list view, because we were local in the current file, and we were looking out to other files to get relationships. And if we needed to look back at the first file, we had to go to that other file and set up a relationship over there that would look back at the original file, right? That's exactly what this is doing. If I have customers and I want to look at orders, I'm setting up a table occurrence group that goes customers underscore orders, to customers underscore orders, line items, something like that. And if I want to set up, a relationship from orders to customers, I go down to the orders table occurrence group and I set up that same relationship back the other direction. It's really just FileMaker 6 relationships with a nice pretty interface on it in some levels, which is good because it helps us make that jump. I was talking to somebody the other day and explaining about learning a new language. Like learning the graph is almost like learning a new language, right? And whenever you learn a new language, there's this time where you're translating everything into the language that you understand. I might be getting ahead of myself here, so I might repeat this in a second, but I'm going to give it now anyway because I like that. So if you're learning a new language and you translate it back into the language you know, and we do that for a while, and so I'm going to try to help you make some connections here and convince you that you should go to a unified graph perhaps, but I'm always going to try to relate it back to anchor buoy because my assumption is that a lot of people are using this type of a technique in their graph already. And so what happens when you're learning another language though, if you're trying to learn Spanish and your native language is English, you're always translating everything you learn back into English, and you're always thinking in English, if you will. But if you were to go live in Mexico or Spain or some other country that speaks Spanish natively, and you lived there for several years, and you learn Spanish, and you learn Spanish, and you learn Spanish, eventually you would start thinking in Spanish. Your thoughts would be in Spanish, right? You make a transition there. And so what I'm trying to say is that it takes some work to get from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. And some of this is going to be a little hard work. You're just going to have to immerse yourself into the graphing technique and try it out before you get there. But I think it's beneficial. I think you'll find value in that. So I jumped ahead a little bit there, but hey, that's okay. It's my session. So this is one big table occurrence group. This is an example of a unified graph. And you don't always want one, I'm referring to the unified graph, but you don't always want one big table occurrence group. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. There's always a place and a reason for how you do those things. But in this example file that I'm going to be using and showing you guys, I've got one big table occurrence group, except for at the bottom, then we've got a virtual list thing happening. These next series of slides here are about that kind of translation process and whatnot. So as we go to the next one here, I'm trying to whenever I'm moving from anchor buoy into the unified graph, sometimes I'll set up the graph in such a way that I still try to keep that left to right mentality here. So I'll put parent relationships on the left, and I'll put child relationships over on the right. And I'm a little bit right and left dyslexic anyway, so as I'm thinking, I have to really think about left and right whenever I'm talking about like that. And then I'm up here doing motions like this, and behind me that's going the other way. So forgive me as my animation is backwards perhaps. But here we've got customer tables and vendor tables, and their children are going to be things like orders and contacts and invoices and things of that nature. And the child table for vendors is going to be something like purchase orders, right? And you go over one more level, you get like line items for the orders, or line items for the invoice, or line items for the purchase orders and things. And so I still lay things out sometimes in this left to right mentality because it helps me make that transition. It helps me make the leap, if you will. Also, just because I don't want to end up, again, with that graph that I showed you earlier that was like a mess, right? So sometimes I try to keep things organized by putting them in columns because it helps me to just kind of keep that left to right mentality and helps me kind of keep track of where things really are. And so I'll put things in columns just to do this. Now, again, this is the learning Spanish part, right? This is the, I'm a newbie, I'm a student trying to try a new technique on for size, and I don't want to get lost. Eventually, I'm going to show you some screenshots here of solutions we've built at Skeleton Key that use the unified graph that we don't adhere to left to right and columns because our brain has like made that flip, and I can see the same thing without having to organize it that way. Okay, so this is an example of adding table occurrences just to make the solution work like I want it to. And really this is talking about the bidirectionality of some of those relationships. So for example, in the solutions I built last year, I needed a portal on the product table that showed all the purchase orders that product had ever been placed on, right? And I needed a portal on the order or the vendor table showing all the purchase orders that I'd placed with that vendor. Okay, and so on the left is the unified graph, and I basically have my three main tables that are the heads, if you will, or the anchors for this graph. So I've got vendors, and I've got products, and I've got purchase orders down there. And then over on the right-hand side, I've got my anchor buoy graph that I've got products, and I had to actually add that table occurrence in the middle just so I could get to the one that I wanted on to get the portal to work out right. And then I've got the one on the bottom there. So this is just a quick demonstration of what I'm going to try to demo to you in actual FileMaker file a little later about how the unified graph is, you need less table occurrences, I guess, for displaying the same information. And so as I start talking about unified graphs, people see a little simple graph like this one over here that's my unified graph, and they're like, Chad, that's interesting and that's cute, but I've got a really complex solution. My solution's been in development for this many years. I've got 40 tables in it, and there's no way that's going to work for us. And so this is a graph of a solution we built that has 53 tables in it, and it's a unified graph. In fact, that whole top section up there is actually a selector connector type of implementation. And on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, my bad, we've got in red all of the base tables for this solution. So all those red squares are in fact the base tables. And so if you were to make this in an anchor buoy methodology, each one of those would be an anchor and have their own table occurrence group pointing back to something else. And this graph would be significantly taller than it is now. And so I'm not saying that that's always the case, that you should use a unified graph for everything. In fact, I think if we go back and look at the slides from last year, there's several cases where I think anchor buoy is better. But I'm saying it's possible. Don't let something like that scare you off from trying something new. That's really the point. It's not, hey, you should do this. It's hey, don't discount this because you think you've got some special situation. Okay? I realized I'm going to show you some solutions here in a second, and it's going to be natural for you to see those and see this instead. Because if you haven't acclimated yet, anything that's not laid out like you're used to seeing it looks like this. Okay? And so the next series of slides are really examples of unified graphs that are in production and working at Skeleton Key. And I want you to try hard not to see this, but they're also not lined out like I showed you before. So this is a graph, and I wish I had time to demo each one of these and show you the actual solution behind them, because they're more complicated than you think. Like, I show you the graph and it looks pretty simple, it looks pretty small, but the solution behind them is a full-blown solution. It's not something that's dinky and not doing much. It's doing a lot. Here's another example of one. Some of these are actually external table sources doing some ESS type things. Here's another one. And oftentimes when I'm starting out with the unified graph or transitioning into it, I'll make all my base tables like one color and all the other relationships like a different color, so that I can tell at a glance where my base tables are at. Some of the other developers at Skeleton Key don't do that. In fact, one of my good colleagues, Alan, likes to use colors. And so, for example, in this one, he likes to color all the tables of the same all the table occurrences of the same table, the same color. So everything that's turquoise here is based on a particular table, the job table. And everything that's yellow is based on the same table. So at a glance, he can tell which table of currency everything goes with. I like seeing my base tables first and everything else being a more of a muted kind of a color. Like this. This is one where all the base tables are highlighted blue and everything else is kind of in that gray table and stuff. Okay? So even this example, you look at this and it looks pretty simple. It's like there's not much going on here. But if you were to convert this into anchor buoy, think about everything that's blue having its own table occurrence group, right? And several of these relationships being built out in that table occurrence group. And that probably looks a lot more like some of your solutions when it's stacked up, maybe 2 or 3 pages tall and pages so wide, and there's a lot of stuff going on. All right, so that concludes our quick review of last year. It's 10:50. We're about on track. So what are bidirectional relationships? How can we define that and make more sense of that? So this is a typical anchor buoy relationship, a simple one, where we're going from order to line item to products, right? So if you can imagine I'm on an order detail screen, I want to show all the line items of the order, okay? And I want to show the name of the product, so I've got the extra relationship on the end there so I can show the product name field in my portal. It's a pretty simple type of a thing, right? And then this is a pretty simple anchor buoy relationship for the product table. So I would have again a portal on my product table, and maybe I want to see all of the orders that this product's ever been placed on. So it seems like I do some stuff with manufacturing companies, and they do this a lot. Like they'll go to the product table, and they want to know every time a customer's ordered this product. And if a customer calls with a problem, it's quicker and easier for them in their situation to ask them what product number they've got, and go to the product table and find that product number, and then find the order for that customer, than it is to go to the order table and search by customer and pull up. And I don't know why, but that's what they like. Everybody does it different. I try to accommodate. So this is the line item table that's being used in both of these relationships. And this relationship set up here, just the red, just that side, accomplishes both of the other two. So if you look at the top, we got order, line items, product. My bad, order, line items, product. And at the bottom, we got product, line items, and orders. And then on the side, we got order, line items, and product. It's the same thing, up and down, top to bottom. It's the same as the other two. Okay? And so the contention is that if you use a unified graph, you don't need those. You can just build the one side. Okay? So we're going to try to look at this a little more. I'm going to have to sit down for this, but we're going to go into a demo and pull up FileMaker. So, bear with me here. And I am not used to not having my little buttons at the bottom. Didn't mean to do that. Did mean to do that. So because I'm zooming this a little bit so you guys can see it, and you may or may not realize this, but navigation bars don't zoom. So my navigation step up at the top is going to stay small. I apologize, but I want you to see everything else kind of in the middle. And we'll try to do that. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go to the product detail screen. Oh, by the way, this is the solution that I built last year. And actually, I got the wrong one open here, so bear with me there. This is the solution that I built last year to do my testing with. So this is all, it's not a real solution. It's just stuff that I put together last year trying to make something that made sense. And I want to do a find, and we're going to mess with... okay, so I want to find one that actually had some orders in it. So we're setting on products. We're looking at orders. We've got a relationship down here that is the product, line item, orders. Okay? And so really what I want to do is I want to convince you or show you that relationships do work backwards the other way, and that's all okay. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to break anchor buoy rules. So if you're an adamant anchor buoy is the only way to go, this is going to freak you out a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layout. I don't think I've done that yet. I haven't. So let's do, actually I did. So I've got a simplified version of this layout. So I did this ahead of time. So I was up here, we back up a little bit so people don't get lost. So we're up here on products, details. I've got POs and other things going on here that aren't as important for this demonstration. So I just made a duplicate and took all that tab stuff off, and I got rid of some fields over here. So same basic layout, simplified, okay? And what we're going to do from this one, view it, here's the name of my product, here's the orders that it's on. We go to layout mode, I'm going to duplicate this layout. And then what I want to do is I'm going to change this to not use the product table, but we're going to go up and in our graph we're going to use the order table for this. So I'm going to switch this from using, it's currently using this table occurrence section, product, line items, orders, customers. And I'm going to switch it to using this one up here, orders, line items, product, and technically customers. Okay? So first of all, I'm going to change which table occurrence this is based on. So I'm going to go to product, change it up here, and I'm looking for order line item product. Okay? And of course that breaks things. If I go to browse mode, I got unrelated table and nothing shows up and this stuff is all unrelated. And so I'm going to repoint this to my new table occurrence, which is not an anchor. It means it's down in the graph, right? That's the part that's could freak people out. Freaks me out. And I'm going to reset my portal. This is pointing, you know, at orders now, product, line item orders. I want to look back upstream instead of looking down. I want to look back upstream and look at the order table. So I can just change this to be my order table. Okay. And this group of fields actually has a button on it. I'm just going to kind of ungroup those and get rid of the button because I don't care about that for the time being. And so I'm going to double click this one, which is looking at product, line items, orders, customers. It's 4 hops away getting my customer name. And I'm going to go back up again, and I'm going to look upstream to line items, orders, and then turn around and go back downstream 1 hop to orders customer. So I can show you that one more time just to make that clear. We're basing the layout on this one now. We came from down here. It was based here, and everything was looking downstream. And we're changing it to be based on this table occurrence and look upstream because they're the exact same relationships, and FileMaker doesn't care. The rules of Anchor Buoy care, but FileMaker doesn't care, which is the whole purpose, the whole mind warp we're trying to make you more comfortable with. But once I get up to here, we're actually kind of turning around and looking back down just 1 step at the customer. So we're going back up to orders, down 1 step to customer, which is the exact same thing that we go from here, customer, line item, order, all the way over to this table occurrence, which is based on customer. Okay, so we changed that field. I can change these fields. That's one's based on order. Hit OK. This one's going to be based on order. Hit OK. And I'm not going to mess with the merge fields for now just because of time. But you can see that now, if we go back and find for that same record, that I've got everything works. It's the same table, the same layout between this layout and this layout. They're based on different table occurrences. This one's based on the order line item product table. You can see that. And this one is based on the product table. Just as a demonstration to kind of let it sink in that this section of table occurrences is in fact the same as this section of table occurrences when I add that one in. Everybody got that? Is that jiving for everybody? Okay, I realize that might be simple for some, but it's good, I think, to kind of immerse yourself in it and think about it and reiterate because it's helpful. So let's go back to this and this and this. I'm going to stay sitting down because I've only got like 1 slide more and go back to demo mode. So the next thing I want to point out to you is that context is king. And so really what I'm saying here is that the context of the graph is really like looking at your data through a window, right? And every window is a little different. You've got a different picture of the data in your system depending on which table occurrence you're kind of starting from, okay? And if you kind of lean over, I was trying to get a nice visual for this, but if you got like your iPhone or something, you turn it, you get the perspective thing, how like it changes for you. It's the same type of thing. If you lean over a little bit, you get a different perspective of the data over there. And if you look through the window this way, you get a different perspective over there. And so every table occurrence on the graph is like its own window. And the way we interact with that as developers is every layout's based on a table occurrence, right? And when you're setting up calculation fields, it asks you what perspective do you want this calculation to run from. And you tell it, I want it to start at this table occurrence. And so we get to control that. And the only time it's really kind of not based on a table a little bit is in value lists. In value lists, you kind of get to say what perspective you're going to start from, and you hard code that in. So the position on the graph dictates the perspective. And I'm realizing now that I probably said your perspective a lot through that and your view. And what I really mean is your solution's view. What I'm talking about is your solution, your user, when they're on a layout, that solution has a particular view to the rest of the data based on the layout you're in. When you're in scripts and you've got a script running, depending on where that script goes and what layout it's in, it has a particular view to the data from wherever it's at, okay? And so let's go look at that. And let's go here. Okay. So on this one, we're going to skip all the layout stuff and jump right into the graph. Does anybody see that okay? Do I need to blow that up? Let's do a little bit of a blow up here. Let's go to maybe 120%. Everybody see that better? All right, cool. So this is the unified graph that I've got in the solution. And it's pretty straightforward. We've got customers over here. There's orders related to customers. There's line items related to the orders. Line items are made up of they belong to orders, but they're made up of products. So we got connection there. Products are also drive the purchase order line items that we order from. They're on purchase orders that are ordered from vendors. Customers get invoiced. Invoices have line items. Pretty standard type of a system. Okay. But when we're on the customer table, our view, imagine a little man over here, right? Our view into the data is all from the customer perspective. And so if you were to do this and set up this graph in a very anchor buoy kind of a process, that would look like this. Whoops. We're going to take this back down for a second. And so, harder to see, zoomed out, I get that. But this looks very much like a tog, right? This is pretty anchor buoy. It's not named like an anchor buoy solution would be, but it's the same thing. Agreed? Okay. So what if I wanted to see the perspective of stuff from an order table? Well, if I did that, if my little guy was sitting on an order layout, let's grab all of this and let's scoot it over here, and he's going to be looking at things through the perspective of an order layout or something of that nature. Then I can grab this stuff, and he sees the world. Doesn't really matter. I don't like crossed lines, so we'll put it down here. Right? A little cleanup. This looks very anchor buoy-ish as well. Again, I have an order tog. Agreed? What if we're wanting to see things from a product standpoint? Well, a product standpoint, his view is going to be the product table. That's what he's going to be looking at, right? And this stuff would all go somewhere like that. And customers and everything else, if I can grab all of it at once, is going to come up here like such. Still don't like cross things, so I got to put that somewhere else. But you get the idea that all this still stays very anchor buoy-ish. Actually, this stuff hops over to this side. If I were making it true, kind of a left to right mentality. There we go. That's starting to look more like an actual table occurrence group. And again, all this is just trying to demonstrate to you that our little guy, wherever your context is, wherever your script is at, whatever layout you're on, he sees everything else through the path that he can. It's like he's looking down a tunnel, and he can just see all the way down the tunnel that he can go. But FileMaker doesn't care that it's all laid out left to right. That's just what we've done, so it makes sense to us to make anchor buoy make sense, right? We can totally take this back. Let me just cancel all those changes and then go back into it. We can totally set this up in a unified graph that makes sense to me. I almost cringe to say it this way, but it's almost like an ERD to your system. It's totally not that. I don't want to paint that picture. But so this is a little insight to how we do things, some things at Skeleton Key. we communicate about systems internally very much on an ERD basis. Like whenever Mark is talking to a client and he's scoping out what they need and stuff, he'll draw up an ERD of what he thinks the day looks like and give that to me or Greg or someone else and help use the ERD as a communication method of what the system should look like. And that helps us more than maybe it helps most, because in a lot of ways that's how our graph is going to turn out. And so whenever I'm sitting here thinking about problems for a client, I'll have an ERD on paper or on the whiteboard in my office next to me sometimes so that I can remember exactly how these things are all going to link. Because most of this stuff, whenever I'm talking about a unified graph, most of these connections, if we look at this, they're simple connections. They're primary key to foreign key. That's all these are at this point. Like all my other connections to drive the special filter portals or to drive the special process, whatever, that's all going to be a separate table occurrence group if I need to, or it's going to be one of these gray tables. But my primary unified graph is the simple ERD stuff that's primary key to foreign key. Okay. One more example to try to make that make sense. So I set up, so let's go to orders first. This is orders detail. So I've got this product, items table here. And I've got, if we go to purchase orders, I think it is. Nope, if I go to products, I've also got an order history portal here, okay? And so if we look at that, this order history is looking at line items. If you guys can see that, line items, okay? And if we go back to the original one, orders, this is looking at, guessed it, line items. It's the same table occurrence group. It's the one I mentioned earlier in my example to, Anchor Buoy versus Unified. So what I did is really try to make this make sense. I just made a copy of the order detail screen. Again, I just kind of took away the tabs because that's clutter at this point. And so, and I've got myself, let's go to layout mode. This layout's based on order. I've got myself a copy also of the product detail screen. So this is based on product. And just to give you one more glance at the graph, I've got a table based here and a table based here, portal on each of them based here, okay? And so one of the advantages to developing with the unified graph is that I can take this portal, probably don't want those buttons, they're not going to work, but I just copied that, and I'm going to switch down to the other screen, and I'm just going to paste that, and it just works. There is no recreating the portal and relinking the fields and stuff. It just works. So I can copy things around, and I can do that surprisingly often whenever you're in the middle of development. It's, whenever I first saw someone do that, I thought, I'm not sure that that's going to work a lot. It works a lot. So obviously, I'm sitting on a product table, and I've got the product field there. That isn't going to make much sense. I do need to change a couple things here and put this back up to customer name in order for it to be a little more useful. Okay, and try to find one that actually has more than one thing to it. There we go. So here's an item that we have several customers that have ordered, and if I switch back to the other screen, now we're to try to find that same, one of those same people, we could see their products there as well. So, long story short, the context of the system, it's not only important that you recognize where your system is and what view it has. This little guy's view is not the only thing that's important. It's important for you to realize that if I can imagine him over here on the line items table or down here on the products table, that I can see that, hey, he can look upstream and see back to customers from there with no problems. Okay? Any questions about any sort of bidirectionality context stuff? Any problems or, yes? The question is this viewed as the best practice suggested by FileMaker? And I can't speak for FileMaker. I'm not sure where they would stand on that. I would say that I've talked to people at FileMaker, and I've talked to people in different places, and I think the contention is that by sticking with just Anchor Buoy, for example, we're leaving a lot of the power of FileMaker on the table. And so I wouldn't say they would say one way is better than the other, because all that's going to be dependent on your situation and what you're trying to get done. But I think the people at FileMaker want us to use the tool to the fullest of its capabilities, and I think it's frustrating for them when they realize that we're stuck in a thing that's 10 or 15 years old, a technique that is older, and at least not exploring all that FileMaker can do with the different relationships. Yeah. The question is, have I ever made a layout based on a join table? And again, that's going to be very context specific. So depending on the solution, you definitely could do that. FileMaker doesn't care; it will let me do that. And because I'm sitting here in front of several hundred people, I'm having a hard time thinking of why I would do that right now. So I'm going to say yes, you could do that, and yes, there's probably a reason to do that, but I'm coming up blank at the moment. So exactly right. So the statement was that he's understanding the message to be to use the links or the relationships that are already there instead of recreating them again. And so we have I don't know if everybody does this, but we have a developer's manifesto at Skeleton Key. All the developers are kind of expected to follow a certain process on some levels. And one of the things that we tell developers are not to build something you don't need yet. Right? So we don't want them to jump in and make a bunch of assumptions about what a client needs and build this thing out just to go back to the client and figure out they didn't need half of that stuff, right? Because that wastes time, it wastes money, it's not productive. And so if you take that same mindset and you apply it to the graph, yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying don't build stuff you don't need yet. And when I look at this graph and I connect my primary and my foreign keys in this nature, there's a lot of things that I don't need that I would start building if I were looking at this graph. The very nature of keeping them all separate, the big benefit of this that we lose in the unified graph is whenever I want to select this field name and I look at my relationships, I get this related tables and unrelated tables. And this makes life easy for me as a developer to see where I am. Right? I understand that my whole world has been zoomed down to these 5 table occurrences, and that's all I care about. Okay, and that's the big benefit to Anchor Buoy and makes life easier. And what I'm saying is that especially in a solution like this, where I've got 50 or 60 table occurrences, that's super useful. But if I switch back over to the unified graph, I've only got 20 or 30 table occurrences here. I forget how many there are exactly, but I do lose that a little bit if I jump in here and I want to choose a field. My related tables are practically everything. At this point, I've got some down here that are my virtual list tables, but the whole system is related. But the number of table occurrences that I have to scroll through are much less. And you'll notice that I still, not everybody at Skeleton Key does this, but I still adhere to an Anchor Buoy-ish type of a naming convention. So all my base tables are in all caps. So at a glance, I can know which ones are base tables. And if I start building off of there, I'll use a path naming type of thing so that I can know that, okay, this one is connected to line items and it's based on the invoice items table. And this one is line items and it goes through invoice item and it's based on the invoice table. And so I kind of have my own processes there to keep that straight in my head so that this view doesn't get terribly complex. But yeah, we like to not build things until we need them. And oftentimes if you set the graph like this and you just realize how we can look upstream and downstream, you don't need those other relationships. In the back. The question is indexing considerations. And so I'm not sure I have indexing considerations. So when FileMaker starts up, it's going to walk the graph for complexity. And so some of the things that we found last year in the comparisons and stuff, that the opening routine, so I set up a test that would just open the file, close the file, open the file, close the file, and it would quit FileMaker in the middle. It was a scripted type of thing. I let that run for several minutes and stuff. And we found that just through that process, that the unified graph was faster at just opening and getting to the first layout than the Anchor Buoy or the selector connector graphs were. And so part of that's just walking the graph and FileMaker having to make sense of all the relationships and kind of get that loaded so it can do that. When it comes to actual indexing, though, I'm not sure. I don't know for sure how that would impact the actual graph in other table occurrences. What I'm thinking of when you ask that automatically is like when you do imports and you do new records and things like that, index tables are going to be slower than non-index tables. But if you're doing that on layouts that are not connected, if you've got a developer layout where you're doing that from, then the related tables aren't really going to hit that very hard, I don't think. So I'm not sure that there's much impact on indexing. Yep. Okay. So let's jump back. We'll do more Q&A at the end. Let's jump back to here. And the next thing I want to talk about, I think better standing up. I've got a stand-up desk at home, and I put it up and put it down because when I'm on the phone with people, I talk, and when I'm sitting down programming, I sit. So for the next series here, we're going to talk, play. Okay. So this is the part where I try to convince you that the unified graph is slightly more dry than a different technique. And so dry just means don't repeat yourself. And so there's a couple sessions that I think we've had here about how to do that in scripting, like how to be abstract and how to set up scripts in such a way you can reuse them in different areas and stuff. And so I'm just trying to apply that same technique, that same thought process to the graph and say, hey, let's not recreate what did we already give us. And so this kind of talks to some of the things we talked about a second ago. So what I'm doing here is I'm highlighting a tog on one side, and I'm showing you the same tables on the unified graph that make up that tog. So where I was kind of rearranging things so Mario could look down the line here, this is a similar sort of a process, just without the rearrangement, okay? So that top table occurrence up there is made up of these tables over here. This table occurrence group is made up of those tables. That table occurrence is made up of those tables over there. So on and so forth, right down the line. And so everything that is in that anchor buoy graph is represented in the unified graph. And I want to make sure, so sometimes when I have this discussion with someone about anchor buoy versus unified, they'll make the argument, yeah, anchor buoy is worse because you have to follow these rules and you have to put all these table occurrences in, and you've got to like reproduce all the relationships. And because it's Skeleton Key, we don't build stuff we don't need. I don't buy into that. I'm like, anchor buoy is better than you're making it out to be because I don't put those relationships in until I actually need them for my layout. So when I go to build a layout and I need to display a certain, excuse me, a certain portal or a certain field, then I'll put it on the graph and then I'll make it be there. So what I'm trying to say is that in the example of the anchor buoy graph that I have here, I didn't add anything that wasn't needed. Every table occurrence there is doing something in the solution I built. It's displaying a field, or it's displaying a portal, or it's part of a script. There's nothing there that's just to illustrate what anchor buoy is. It's all actually being used, okay? Here's our table occurrence, and it's represented on that side. Each one of these is fully there on the unified graph side of things, okay? So if you wanted to, that's my whole topic about dry, by the way. If you wanted to convert from a unified graph to something else, I forget what time the session's supposed to get over. We got like 15 more minutes, right? Give or take? Okay. So if you wanted to do that, then is it worth the trouble? And so I'm going to say, if you've already got an existing solution, if you've already built something and you're working for a client and they're paying you by the hour or by the project, then no, don't switch. That's crazy, right? You're not going to get enough benefit out of it to do that. So if you've already started, don't mess with trying to switch. If you're an in-house developer and you're working on the same system for year in, year out, and you're trying to make it better, there's going to be a natural time where you're going to try to maybe do a rewrite or some sort of big change because of an upgrade to FileMaker, and you're moving from 11 to 16 or something of that nature. And I'm going to say it might be worth it to think, if you like the idea of the unified graph, don't take your big mission critical system and just switch to it, on a whim, but play around with things and have a development version and try to switch to that and see if it makes sense to you. And so I'm going to say maybe if you're an in-house developer. If you're doing new projects and you've got something coming up, then I'm going to ask that don't just discount a unified graph or bidirectional relationships out of hand. I'm going to say, yeah, give it a shot. Play around with things. Give it a go-to. Okay. If you are in one of the first top ones up there and you've already got a graph and you want to switch to a unified graph, well, how would you go about doing that? We're gonna look at that. So make a backup. That's the first thing you'd want to do, right? I like to print the graph, and then I like to kind of go down in the same diagrams that I mentioned to you guys through that whole dry presentation. Like I would do the same thing. I would print the graph, and I would try to recreate those or circle those and try to redraw each one of those table occurrences on and make my own dry diagrams. And then just jump in and start modifying the graph, and then, which I've got a couple slides on, we'll update calculation fields after that, and then we'll update layouts, and then we'll update scripts in that order. And so mostly, anytime you mess with the graph, you're going to break things, right? So that's the big thing, is you're going to break things. And so I would probably also go ahead and say right here, go find something like FM Perspective or Base Elements or one of those tool inspector, one of those tools that let you dig in and see where your stuff is organized and what relies on what. Go have something like that at your disposal if you're going to start messing with the graph much on a live system, especially. I didn't just say that. You don't ever go do that on a live system. What I meant to say was on your development server that you are changing things on before you roll it out to the live system, because that's how we all do that, right? So if we want to delete relationships, I'm saying delete these, right? And then I'm going to say rearrange these so that they look like this, and then reconnect them. And then once you reconnect them, everything's going to break. And so you're going to remove the extra table occurrence. This is where your printed off graph comes into play. You're going to start looking at it like, well, if I reconnect these things, what's extra now? What's left over that I don't need any longer? And you're going to start taking those things off. And then when you get done with all that, you're going to go fix your calculations, your layouts, and your scripts. Okay? And so I meant to put this at the end. I forgot to rearrange it, but we're Q&A. This session will not have updates. Actually, it will have updates because I forgot to put this stuff up there. So this is wrong. I'll post the slides after the session. My bad. And thank you. Please fill out your evaluations. So backwards to Q&A. Thank you. Thank you. So the question is, the unified graph, is that something we would call a spider graph? So there's a really good document. I've got links to it. Don't have it up here. It's in last year's session to, I can't remember the guy's name now. He's from Nightwing Consulting. Somebody, yes. He's got a great white paper that's, I think it's from 2009 timeframe, 2010, that describes a whole bunch of different graphing techniques. It's really worth the read. And one of those is the spider graph. But there's a lot of others too. And it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so it was a nice, it's a fun thing. And I'm going to say yes, with the caveat, and it is a spider graph, but sometimes the spider graph is really that really messy graph that I showed you early on. That's what people think of when you say spider graph, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not calling it a spider graph, is because really what I'm proposing here, it is the messy graph. It is a go back to the messiness, but take what you've learned, try to adapt to it, and get beyond the I don't know Spanish part, and really let your mind switch over to seeing what's there. Exactly. So what he's saying is that there's a session yesterday where Hans, I believe it is from 24U, or I forget now, was saying that they took their solution, and he's got a great tool actually for processing the speed of things, and that's worth checking out as well. And they found that moving from a big spider graph to an anchor buoy graph actually helped their system go much, much faster. Obviously, I don't know under the hood on any of their stuff. I wasn't able to see that. And so I'm not, again, saying the anchor buoy is bad, and I'm not saying unified is the end-all, be-all. You should move to that. I'm saying that as developers, we're experts in our field, and if the only thing you know is anchor buoy, then that's really not an expert. You're trying to do finished carpentry with a sledgehammer, and I'm saying sometimes the sledgehammer is right, sometimes it's not, but I want you to know the difference, and I want you to be able to make a decision in your own solution which one's best. Sure. So he's asking how a session table might be tied in with the unified graph, and so I'm gonna add lib to that a little bit and say by a session table. Are you guys familiar with the selector connector technique? So that's a similar type of thing where you set up a table occurrence. It's like in a global table. You've got some global fields in there. You set an ID for any table, and it's connected to all your other tables. So you can pretty much from anywhere in the system be able to control or add records or modify records anywhere else in the system. For lack of at a very condensed, it's more than that, but for time's sake, that's a synopsis of it. And so I'm going to say that yes. So if we look at the big tall graph that I showed earlier with all the little red boxes and stuff, that was using a selector connector technique. And what I've found in a lot of solutions is that there's still a funnel of data that goes up to that area. So for example, in that solution we had, I think our three main tables were like customer and products and vendors or something like that, because we found that everywhere else in the system something had a customer or a product or a vendor. And so technically I could, if I was doing something over in the orders table, I couldn't use the selector connector process until I had assigned a customer to that order. But once I'd assigned a customer to that order, then the selector connector process was available to me. So it takes some management, but it's still possible. So the question is, do we use daisy chain delete in the unified graph and or cascading deletes? And so I'm going to say, yeah, I probably will set those up like I would anywhere else. But sometimes that scares me, right? And so I want to be really careful with that. And oftentimes what I will do is I'll set up a special table occurrence group for my deletes like that. If nothing else, as a developer, it helps me keep track of where those are at. And so, I'll just take the two that are going to do that, I'll put them down somewhere else, I'll put all those in one spot, and so I'll know, like if I need to know for my graph, like are there cascading deletes here, I can go to the section of the graph that's used for that and keep track of it. So the question is just, the way that I organize the graph, what's the logic with that? And I'm going to say that when I'm in that mode of moving from what I'm used to the unified graph, I try to stick with what I'm used to. And so I laid out everything out in a left to right format because I'm used to my table occurrence groups being left to right. And I put things in columns up and down because it helped me to see the structure of the data and helped me kind of get adapted to that. But then in all the other examples I showed of the unified graphs we have and stuff there, that's really just the developer's prerogative, what makes sense to him. And so sometimes that means it's process oriented, so I'll put all the table occurrences that are about a certain process over in one spot, or I'll put, I'll make it look like my ERD to start with because that helps me, or something else. So once you make that switch in your head that it's not scary to look at it all going different directions, then it's really kind of up to the developer, at least at Skeleton Key. Anybody want to see the graphs from last year? So this is a comparison of the table occurrence groups, or the TO count. So I built the solution 3 times, unified graph, anchor buoy, and selector connector. And so the unified graph, we had 24 table occurrences, and the anchor buoy had 46, and selector connector had 58. So that gives you, some perspective. And again, this is a small little baby solution, right? It's just a demo solution for doing this. This wasn't actually a real solution. But if you can imagine, remember that big graph that I showed you with all the red boxes and stuff? If we were to take that and extrapolate an anchor buoy model out of that, we would, like it had hundreds and hundreds of table occurrences already. It probably would have had thousands of table occurrences. It'd been crazy. I did lots of testing. I used Wireshark to do testing between the server and the client to see what was getting loaded in basically on startup. And I was really careful to make sure that we would close FileMaker and open FileMaker so that you weren't getting like cached information and stuff. And so this is, it turns out this is not a big enough difference to make a huge impact on your performance, is what I found actually. The numbers here are so small that it wasn't that big of an impactor, but Unified definitely started up faster than the other solutions. Excuse me. It's not that it started up faster perceivably. I wasn't measuring time. I was just measuring how much data went across the pipe. So technically, this is just how much data went across the pipe, not necessarily startup time per se. And this is how long it took me to set up the graph. And really, I didn't measure that exactly in hours. I kept track of that, but I've since lost that because this is last year's graphic. So what I did is I made unified like equal to 1, and then everything else is just relational to that. So the anchor buoy took me about 1 3/4 times, almost twice as long to set up as the unified graph did because it was just a much bigger graph, more complex graph. And the selector connector was about twice as long. And again, it's just because I had to set up more stuff. I had to work in the graph longer. None of them were very long in that solution. I'm not trying to say that it was super hard, but it took me longer to set the others up. And some of that could be is because I was used to the unified graph. So like your mileage may vary here because whatever you're used to, that's what you're going to be fastest at, right? The scripting setup was basically the same. The layout setup was a little bit faster for Unified because I had several places in here where I could do that portal copy that I mentioned to you guys earlier. I was able to take the work I did on one layout and copy it to another layout and just reuse it instead of having to recreate it. And so it wasn't a lot, but I did see a benefit there. And that's all the graphs I really had from last year as well. Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you.